The small coastal town was once full of life. Children played on the beach, fishermen sang while bringing in their catch, and people helped one another like a big family. But when the disaster came, everything changed overnight. A massive storm struck the coast with brutal force. Waves rose like mountains, winds screamed through the houses, and in a few hours the town that had been peaceful for generations was left in ruins. Roofs were gone, boats were broken, streets were flooded, and people were lost. The air smelled of salt, mud, and fear. What was once a home turned into a graveyard of memories. Days turned into weeks, and hope began to fade. The government promised help, but no one came. The people waited every day by the broken dock, staring at the empty sea, hoping to see a rescue boat appear, but the only things that came were dead fish and floating wood. The food supplies had finished, the drinking water had turned dirty, and sickness began to spread among the children. Every morning the sound of crying echoed through the ruins. People prayed, but even the prayers seemed to disappear in the wind. There was a small community center left standing in the middle of the town. It was one of the few buildings not completely destroyed. People gathered there every evening, sharing what little food they had and trying to keep their spirits alive. Among them was an old fisherman named Rafik. He had lived his entire life by the sea, and he could read the weather better than any scientist. He looked around at the tired faces and said, "If we keep waiting, we will all die here. We need to call for help ourselves." His voice carried strength, and people listened. A young man named Amir, who once worked as a radio technician in the nearby city, stood up. "I still have an old radio transmitter," he said. "It's damaged, but maybe I can fix it." That night, using candles for light, Amir and a few others worked for hours trying to repair the radio. The wires were wet, the batteries weak, and the storm had destroyed most of the cables. But they did not give up. They worked through the night, listening to the sea crash outside. Rafik and others took turns holding lanterns, their faces glowing with a small spark of hope. By dawn, Amir managed to make the radio come alive. A faint static filled the room and everyone froze in silence. "It's working," Amir whispered. He adjusted the knobs and spoke into the microphone. "This is a distress call. Our town has been destroyed by the storm. We have no food, no water, and no medicine. Please help us. Anyone who can hear this, we need you." His voice trembled slightly, but there was courage in it. They repeated the message every hour for the next 3 days. They sent it on every frequency they could think of. Some people doubted anyone would hear. Others believed that someone kind, someone merciful would listen and come to save them. Mothers told their children, "Don't worry, help is on the way." Even though their stomachs were empty, their hearts were filled with fragile hope. Meanwhile, life in the town grew harder. The days were hot and the nights cold. The sea that once fed them now seemed cruel, carrying the smell of death. People collected rainwater in broken buckets. Old men walked miles inland searching for fruits or clean water. Some never came back. Every loss hit the town like another wave of sorrow. Still, they clung to the belief that help would come. The SOS signal had to reach someone. On the 5th day, Amir caught a faint reply through the radio. It was just a short burst of sound, like a whisper through the static. Everyone leaned closer. "This is received. Sending help." The words were broken, but they were enough to make the whole room cheer. People hugged each other and cried. Rafik raised his hands to the sky and said, "See, mercy exists. Someone has heard us." That night, for the first time in many days, people smiled as they slept. Children dreamed about rescue ships with white flags. Women began cleaning what was left of their homes, preparing to welcome their saviors. Men stood by the shore scanning the horizon. Each passing hour felt like a lifetime. They imagined soldiers bringing food, doctors treating the sick, and volunteers helping rebuild their homes. Hope painted pictures in their minds of safety, comfort, and kindness. They believed their nightmare was finally ending, but even as they dreamed, the world beyond their little town was different from what they imagined. Somewhere far away on the other side of the ocean, their SOS had been received, but not by any government agency or charity group. It had reached private contractors who scanned disaster signals for opportunities. These were not rescuers, but businessmen who saw destruction as profit. When they heard the message, they didn't see starving people. They saw a chance to take land, resources, and publicity. In the town, no one knew this truth yet. They kept believing that mercy was coming. Rafik spent every day at the coast, standing with his old telescope looking for ships. Amir stayed by the radio, repeating the SOS message just in case more help might come. The children played around the wreckage, laughing for the first time in weeks. Even though hunger still hurt their bodies, hope had numbed the pain. One morning before sunrise, Amir's radio crackled again. "Help is near," a voice said. It was smooth, confident, and clear. Amir jumped up and shouted, "They're coming." They said help is near. The whole town woke up. People rushed to the beach carrying small flags and handmade signs saying welcome and thank you. The sky turned golden as the sun rose and the villagers stood waiting, hearts full of relief. Out in the distance, dark shapes began to appear on the horizon, ships large and fast moving directly toward the shore. As the waves crashed and the silhouettes grew clearer, Rafik felt tears in his eyes. "They heard us," he whispered. "The world did not forget us." He thought of his lost friends, his broken boat, and the life that had been washed away. Maybe now things could begin again. Around him, children pointed excitedly, and women waved pieces of cloth like flags of joy. The air was full of emotion, fear, hope, disbelief, and happiness all mixed together. The radio kept repeating the same message. "Assistance is on the way. Stay where you are." Amir's hands trembled as he listened, unaware of who was really behind that calm voice. No one in the town questioned it. They were too desperate, too hungry, too tired to doubt. For them, any voice offering hope was good enough. The people began preparing food for their rescuers, using the last of their supplies. Some even brought small gifts, shell necklaces, dried fish, flowers to thank those who were coming. As the morning went on, the ships came closer, and a strange silence fell over the crowd. The vessels were dark gray, not white like humanitarian ships. There were no flags of any nation, no markings of the Red Cross. Instead, strange logos were painted on their sides. A few of the older men frowned, sensing something wrong. But before they could speak, the ships dropped anchor, and sleek black vehicles rolled toward the beach. The town burst into cheers, not realizing that the people inside those vehicles were not saviors, but opportunists. At that moment, the story of their SOS truly began, the moment when hope met reality. The town's call for mercy had been heard, yes, but by ears that had no mercy to give. They believed salvation was coming, but in truth, something far more dangerous was on its way. The sea that had destroyed them once was now bringing another kind of storm, one made of greed and deceit. The people of the town stood smiling at the shore, not knowing that the real struggle for survival was only beginning. The morning the ships arrived, the whole town gathered near the beach. The sound of engines echoed across the water, and the people cheered as the big gray vessels approached. For many, it was the most beautiful sight they had seen in weeks. The sun shone on the waves, and the air was filled with excitement. Children jumped and waved. Old men stood proudly, and women held babies close, whispering prayers of gratitude. They believed their suffering was about to end. They believed help had finally arrived. As the first ship stopped near the shore, a large ramp opened and men in dark uniforms began walking down. Their faces were hidden behind glasses and helmets, and their steps were firm and disciplined. They looked strong and professional, and the townspeople clapped as they approached. A tall man with silver hair and cold eyes stepped forward. He smiled faintly and raised his hand. "My name is Draven," he said in a deep voice. "We heard your call for help. We're here to bring order and recovery." His words brought another wave of cheers. The people surrounded him, thanking him again and again. Rafik stepped forward and shook his hand, his eyes full of tears. "You're a gift from God," he said. Draven smiled politely, though his eyes didn't show warmth. "We'll do everything we can to rebuild your town," he replied. "But first we must organize things properly. We need to take control of this area to make the recovery safe and efficient." Nobody questioned him. They were too relieved to have someone in charge. Draven's team quickly began setting up tents, vehicles, and equipment. They unloaded boxes with foreign labels, took photographs, and talked into radios. Everything looked professional. Amir helped them find power lines and fix the signal tower. Rafik guided them through the damaged parts of the coast, explaining where the boats had sunk and where the water was still deep. The villagers followed every order with gratitude, believing these men were their rescuers. But within a few days, small things started to feel strange. The food that Draven's men brought was not shared equally. They said it needed to be stored and counted first. When mothers asked for milk for their children, they were told to wait. When sick people went to their tents for medicine, The guards outside refused to let them in without permission. Draven always had explanations. He said everything had to be done systematically, that they must be patient, that he was following protocol. The people wanted to trust him, so they stayed quiet. A week passed, and the atmosphere began to change. The workers under Draven started building fences around certain areas. They said it was for security, but soon the townspeople realized those fences surrounded their fishing docks and the land near the water. That land was their lifeline, the only place left where they could catch fish or gather supplies. When Rafik asked what they were doing, a guard simply said, "Restricted zone." Amir grew suspicious. One night, he went near the fenced area and saw trucks being loaded with boxes from the shore. He noticed labels that said "Property of Bluefront Corporation." He didn't know what that meant, but it didn't look like rescue work. The next morning, he tried to ask Draven, but Draven just smiled and said, "We're removing debris, young man. Don't worry. Everything we do is for your safety." Slowly, the town began to realize that the promises were just words. The contractors had not come to save them. They had come to take control. They brought their own guards who carried weapons and patrolled the streets. They took over the radio tower, saying it was now for official use only. The SOS station that Amir had built was shut down. He wasn't allowed near it anymore. When the townspeople tried to complain, Draven would hold meetings and talk smoothly about future plans. He said they were working on building a factory that would create jobs. But they saw no construction, only more fences and guards. The villagers who worked near the shore were told to leave. Their boats were seized, their tools taken. The company even marked several houses with red paint and said they were unsafe and had to be cleared. Soon entire families were forced to move out. One afternoon, Rafik tried to stop a bulldozer that was tearing down a neighbor's house. He stood in front of it shouting, "This is our land. You can't do this." The guard pushed him aside roughly and said, "Orders from above." When the old man fell to the ground, others rushed to help him, but the guards pointed their guns and shouted, "Back off!" The people froze in fear. For the first time, they understood what kind of help they had welcomed. That night, a meeting was held secretly in the broken community center. The mood was dark. Amir, Rafik, and several others sat in silence, the flicker of candlelight reflecting in their worried eyes. "We made a mistake," Amir said quietly. "The SOS. It brought the wrong people." An old woman wept softly in the corner. "We called for mercy," she said, "and the wolves came." Days turned into weeks, and the situation worsened. The guards began rationing food, giving the townspeople just enough to survive. Anyone who spoke against them was threatened or beaten. A few young men tried to escape to a nearby city, but they never returned. Rumors spread that Draven had men stationed on the roads. The town was becoming a prison. Draven himself stayed calm, always wearing the same faint smile. He often walked among the people with a clipboard in his hand, pretending to care. "We're almost done with Phase 1, he would say. "Soon you'll see progress." But behind his calmness was calculation. He had already signed deals with investors to use the land for a private shipping base. The disaster-struck town had become his gold mine. Amir could not sleep at night. He kept thinking about the SOS signal he had sent. The message that was supposed to save them had become the reason for their suffering. He sat alone by the broken radio, now guarded by Draven's men, feeling helpless. Rafik tried to comfort him, saying, "You did what you thought was right. None of us could have known." But deep down, Amir felt guilty. Every cry for help that echoed across the sea had been a doorway for greed to enter. Meanwhile, the people began to lose their spirit. The laughter of children disappeared again, replaced by silence. The sea breeze, once soothing, now carried the sound of machines and engines. The town looked less like a home and more like a construction site guarded by strangers. Even the birds had stopped coming. One evening, Draven gathered the townspeople for an announcement. Standing on a platform surrounded by guards, he declared, "Starting tomorrow, all residents must move to the northern side of the town. We're building new facilities here." People shouted in protest, but his guards raised their weapons. Draven's smile didn't fade. "This is for your safety," he said smoothly. "Anyone who refuses will be considered a threat to the operation." That night, the people packed what little they had left. Some cried quietly, others stared blankly at the ground. Rafik held his old fishing net tightly. It was the only thing left from his past. Amir, meanwhile, looked at the radio tower in the distance. He thought of all the times he had spoken into that microphone begging for help. Now that same tower broadcasted only silence. When morning came, trucks rolled in to move people. Those who refused were forced at gunpoint. The homes that had stood for generations were flattened in hours. Dust rose into the air, covering everything in a gray fog. Children coughed, women screamed, and men watched helplessly. Amid the chaos, Draven stood calmly, giving orders. From a distance, Amir saw him and felt a fire ignite inside him. He realized they had been too trusting, too silent. Their SOS had brought predators who wore the mask of saviors. The people had lost their freedom because they believed that help always comes with kindness. That moment, Amir made a silent promise. He would not let their story end like this. As the sun set over the broken town, the sky burned red, and the once peaceful sea glowed with angry light. The people who had sent a cry for mercy now stood surrounded by fences and guards. The world they had known was gone. But deep inside their hearts, something was beginning to awaken. A quiet anger, a desire to fight back. They didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a new chapter. The helpless survivors were slowly turning into something else, something stronger, something that would make even men like Draven afraid. The days after the forced relocation were heavy with silence and anger. The people had moved to the northern side of the town, where the land was rough, dry, and full of stones. There were no wells, no trees, and no shade. The area had been left untouched for years because nothing grew there. Draven called it the safe zone, but everyone knew it was just a way to push them away from the coast where his men were working. The villagers lived under makeshift tents made from torn sheets and plastic, struggling to survive once again. Amir spent most of his time sitting by a burnt piece of wood that he used as a stool, staring at the horizon. He couldn't stop thinking about the radio message that had brought these men. He remembered his voice trembling as he said, "Please help us." The words now haunted him. Rafik tried to keep the people calm, reminding them that despair would only make Draven stronger. "We are still here," he told them. "As long as we breathe, our story isn't finished." But even his old, wise eyes looked tired. Every day, trucks from Draven's camp moved in and out of the fenced area. Dust rose with every wheel that turned. The sound of engines echoed through the empty streets that once were full of life. From afar, the people could see their old homes being torn apart and loaded into containers. The boats that once belonged to the fishermen were now being painted with new names, names of Draven's company. The land that had fed generations was being stolen piece by piece. Then one night, something unexpected happened. A young boy named Hamza, only 12 years old, sneaked near the fenced area out of curiosity. He wanted to see what the men were doing with their old homes. But what he saw changed everything. Hidden behind large metal sheets and trucks, there were piles of supplies, boxes full of food, medicine, and clean water. They were labeled with International Aid Organization logos, the same ones the people had been waiting for. Those supplies had been meant for the town, but Draven's men had taken them for themselves, hiding them away. Hamza ran back to the camp, breathless. He told Amir and Rafik what he saw. At first, they thought the boy must be mistaken. But when Amir heard the details, the printed logos, the sealed containers, the guards eating food that looked fresh, he knew it was true. The truth hit him like a storm. Help had actually come, but Draven had stolen it. Their cries for mercy had not been ignored by the world. They had been intercepted by men with greed in their hearts. The next day, Amir and 2 others decided to see it with their own eyes. They waited until night and quietly moved through the shadows. The moonlight guided them as they crept past sleeping guards and trucks. When they reached the warehouse area, they saw what Hamza had described. Crates full of rice, canned food, water bottles, and boxes of medical kits stacked high. The sight made Amir's heart ache. So much help, so close, yet kept away from those who truly needed it. As they turned to leave, they heard footsteps. 2 guards were patrolling nearby. Amir and the others hid behind a pile of boxes, holding their breath. The guards stopped to smoke and started talking. Their conversation revealed even darker truths. They talked about how Draven was planning to sell the aid supplies to other towns, making a huge profit. They laughed about how easily the poor fools had believed their lies. When the guards left, Amir's hands were shaking with anger. He whispered, "We can't stay silent anymore." Rafik agreed. "They have taken everything," he said. "Now they even steal our mercy." That night, back at the camp, the two men gathered the townspeople. Under the cold light of the moon, they told everyone what they had seen. At first, people were shocked. Then the shock turned into fury. The crowd's quiet murmurs grew into angry shouts. Mothers who had watched their children starve cried in rage. Men clenched their fists. Even the elders who always preached peace looked ready to fight. "They think we are weak," said Rafik. "They think we will just watch while they destroy our lives. But they have forgotten. We know this land better than anyone. We built this town with our hands. We can take it back." A plan began to form among them. It wasn't about violence, it was about taking back what belonged to them. Amir suggested they strike at night, not to hurt anyone, but to expose the truth. They would take photos of the stolen supplies, record videos, and send them to the authorities using the old emergency channels. If the world could see what Draven was doing, maybe real help would finally come. But to reach the communication tower, they needed to cross through the restricted zone, heavily guarded by Draven's men. It was risky, almost impossible, but Amir was determined. "If I sent the first SOS that brought them here," he said, "then I'll send the next one to end them." The following night, the plan began. The villagers spread out quietly, moving like shadows through the ruins. Rafik and a few others created distractions near the camp by setting small fires far from the tower. The guards rushed toward the flames, leaving the path open for Amir and two young men to slip through. They crawled under the fences, their hearts beating fast, and reached the tower base. The place was silent except for the wind. Inside the control cabin, the lights still worked. Amir's hands shook as he connected the cables and turned on the system. Static filled the air, the same familiar noise that had once carried their cry for help. But this time his message was different. His voice was no longer begging. It was strong, angry, and fearless. "This is the town of Karsa," he said into the microphone. "We were hit by a storm and sent an SOS. Men came pretending to help us, but they are stealing our land and supplies. They are criminals. Please, if anyone hears this, spread the truth. Help us expose them." He repeated the message several times, recording it and sending it through different frequencies. Then he and his team took photos of the warehouses and the stolen aid, capturing clear evidence. As they left, one of the guards spotted them. A loud shout broke the silence. "Stop!" Gunshots echoed in the night. Amir and the others ran, ducking behind broken walls. Bullets hit the ground around them. The noise woke the entire town. People rushed out of their tents, confused and scared. Rafik grabbed a stick and ran toward the sound, yelling for the others to stay back. Amir managed to escape through the narrow alley between fallen houses, his lungs burning, his heart racing. Behind him, flames from the distraction fires lit up the sky, making the whole town glow in orange light. He didn't stop until he reached the camp. When the people saw him covered in dust and sweat, they knew something big had happened. "The message is sent," Amir gasped. "The world will know." Cheers broke out, mixed with tears and relief. But their joy didn't last long. Minutes later, Draven's trucks roared into the camp. His men jumped out, shouting orders, dragging people out of their tents. Draven himself appeared, his calm smile replaced by anger. "Who did it?" he shouted. "Who touched my equipment?" No one answered. The crowd stood silent, defiant. Draven's eyes burned with fury. "If you think the world will save you," he said coldly, "you're fools. No one cares about you. You're nothing." He ordered his men to search every tent. When they found the camera and the recordings in Amir's bag, Draven's smile returned, but it was cruel. "You think you're brave, boy," he said. "But bravery means nothing when no one listens." He ordered Amir to be tied up. The guards dragged him toward the trucks. The people began to shout, trying to stop them, but the guards pointed guns again. Rafik stepped forward, his voice shaking but strong. "You can chain our bodies," he said, "but you can't chain the truth. The world will hear us." Draven looked at him for a long moment, then gave a cold laugh. "Let's see if the world cares," he said before walking away. The trucks drove off, taking Amir with them. That night, the camp was silent again, but something had changed. Fear no longer ruled them. Even though Amir was gone, the people knew his message was out there, floating across the airwaves. Somewhere, someone would hear it. The villagers realized that Draven could control their land, their food, even their lives. But he couldn't control their courage. For the first time since the storm, they felt united. They knew the cost of silence and the power of truth. Rafik looked at the people and said softly, "The world might not know yet, but it will. And when it does, these men will regret ever coming here." In the dark, the villagers lit small fires, not of destruction, but of hope. The flames danced like tiny stars, a symbol that even in the darkest times light could still survive. The realization had come too late for some, but not for all. The town had found its voice again, and nothing could take that away. The night Amir was taken away, the whole camp fell into deep silence. The wind howled through the torn tents, and the people sat in darkness, staring at the empty place where Amir used to sit with his radio. Rafik sat near the fire, his face hidden in his hands. The young boy Hamza sat beside him, whispering, "They took him because he tried to help us. What will we do now?" Rafik lifted his head slowly, his eyes filled with pain but also determination. "We do what Amir would want us to do," he said. "We don't give up." The next morning, Draven's men returned. They were rougher than before. They searched every corner, checking for radios, cameras, or anything that could connect the villagers to the outside world. They broke what little furniture was left, threw food on the ground, and shouted orders. Draven stood watching them, his calm smile back on his face. He spoke softly, but his words were sharp like knives. "Let this be a lesson," he said. "Anyone who tries to act smart will end up like your friend Amir." The people stayed quiet, but inside anger burned like fire. The men clenched their fists, the women glared through tears, and the children watched with fear and hate in their eyes. When Draven left, Rafik gathered everyone again in secret. "They think we are weak," he said. "But they are wrong. Amir gave us courage. Now we must use it." That night they began to plan. They knew they couldn't fight with guns or strength, but they had something more powerful: knowledge of their own land. They knew every path, every hidden route, every corner of the old town. They decided they would not fight directly, but use their surroundings to make Draven's men lose control. They would become invisible, unpredictable, and dangerous. Rafik said quietly, "If they see us as helpless, let them. We'll strike from the shadows. We'll make them fear the ground they stand on." The next few days, strange things began to happen. One morning, the trucks wouldn't start. The guards shouted, checked the engines, and found sand inside the fuel tanks. Another day, the main tent where they stored supplies collapsed during the night. Its ropes had been cut. Tools went missing, fuel drums leaked, and communication lines broke without explanation. Draven grew angry. "Someone is sabotaging us," he yelled. But he had no proof and no idea how it was happening. The truth was simple. The villagers had become clever. They moved silently at night, working together like a single mind. Women distracted the guards by pretending to argue or cry, while the men slipped behind the fences to damage equipment. Even the children played a role, running around near the camp to watch where the guards went. Everyone had a task. Everyone was fighting in their own way. Rafik and Hamza became the secret messengers. They sneaked close to the fences and left marks on trees to communicate, symbols only the villagers understood. They used broken mirrors to send signals from a distance. What had once been a group of broken survivors was now an organized resistance. The people were changing. Their fear was fading, replaced by courage and cleverness. But deep inside, everyone still worried about Amir. No one knew where he was or if he was even alive. Some believed Draven had killed him. Others believed he was being kept prisoner somewhere in the old town. Rafik refused to believe he was dead. "Amir has fire inside him," he told the people. "He won't give up so easily." One night, while they were planning their next move, they heard a faint whistle from the hill. It was a sound they all recognized, the signal Amir used to call for meetings before. Everyone froze. Hamza ran up the hill with Rafik behind him. When they reached the top, they saw a thin figure standing in the shadows. It was Amir. His clothes were torn, his face pale, but his eyes were bright. He was alive. When they brought him back to the camp, everyone surrounded him with joy and relief. Amir smiled weakly and said, "I escaped." He told them everything. How he had been locked inside a container. How he overheard Draven talking to his men about moving all the stolen supplies within a week. And how he managed to slip away when the guards got drunk. His escape gave the people new strength. "We have to end this now," he said. "We can't wait for help anymore. We have to make the world see what's happening here." Amir had memorized the time and route of Draven's next shipment. It would be leaving in 3 nights, carrying all the stolen aid and equipment. If they could stop it and capture proof, photos, videos, or even witnesses, they could expose everything. But to do that, They had to take control of the road for a few hours. Rafik nodded. It's risky, he said, but it's our only chance. The next 2 days everyone prepared. They gathered tools, ropes, and anything useful from the ruins. The fishermen used their old nets to create traps on the road. Women cooked food to keep everyone strong. The children acted as lookouts. Amir worked on repairing one of the small drones Draven's men had abandoned, a camera drone that could record from above. If they could capture footage of the trucks and the stolen goods, no one could deny their story. Finally, the night came. The air was heavy and quiet. The moon was hidden behind clouds. The villagers spread out along the road, hiding behind rocks and trees. Amir held the small remote for the drone, his hands shaking slightly. Rafik stood beside him, holding a wooden stick like a weapon. When the trucks come, he whispered, we block the road. We make them stop long enough to get the proof. The distant sound of engines grew louder. Lights appeared through the trees. 3 big trucks rolled toward them, guarded by 2 smaller vehicles. The villagers waited until the first truck reached the curve, then pulled the ropes. Logs rolled across the road, blocking the path. The truck screeched to a stop. Guards jumped out, shouting and waving their guns. But before they could act, the drone rose into the air, recording everything. The stolen aid logos, the armed guards, the aggressive shouts. The guards fired at the drone, but it was too late. Amir had already sent the footage to the backup device he carried. The villagers shouted from the darkness, their voices echoing through the night. This is our land. You stole from us. The guards panicked, shooting in every direction. The people moved quickly, using their knowledge of the terrain to confuse them. Smoke from burning tires filled the air and chaos erupted. Draven arrived soon after, furious and red-faced. End this now, he screamed. But his men were losing control. They couldn't see who they were fighting, couldn't tell where the next attack would come from. The villagers had turned the land itself into their weapon. Every corner, every shadow, every sound worked against the invaders. In the middle of the confusion, Amir ran toward the last truck. He climbed onto it, opened the doors, and pulled out a few of the stolen boxes. Inside were the aid supplies, still sealed and labeled. He tore off a label and stuffed it into his pocket. It was the final proof they needed. But before he could jump down, Draven spotted him. Draven grabbed a gun and shouted, "You again! You just don't know when to quit!" Amir stared back at him, fearless. "You can destroy our homes," he said, "but you can't destroy the truth." Before Draven could shoot, Rafik threw a rock that hit him on the arm. The gun fired into the air and chaos broke loose again. The villagers rushed forward, forcing the guards to retreat. After a few minutes, the trucks were surrounded by people. Draven's men realized they were outnumbered and ran toward their vehicles. Draven himself stumbled back, his face pale with rage. He jumped into a jeep and drove off into the night, leaving everything behind. The people shouted in victory, their voices filling the dark sky. When the noise faded, Amir stood in the middle of the road, breathing hard. The people gathered around him, cheering and crying. Rafik placed his hand on Amir's shoulder and said, "Tonight they learned who we are. We're not victims anymore." The villagers were tired, bruised, and hungry, but they stood tall. For the first time since the disaster, they felt alive again. That night, they hid the boxes and stored the drone's footage safely. Amir looked at the stars and whispered, "We did it." Rafik smiled. "This is just the beginning," he said. "Now the world will hear our story." The villagers had transformed completely. The people who once begged for help had become warriors of their own survival. The guards called them Deathworlders, a word meant to insult them, but the villagers began using it proudly. To them, it meant strength, courage, and the will to fight no matter what. As the sun rose over the ruined town, its light touched every broken wall and every tired face. The people of Karsa stood together, stronger than ever. They knew the battle wasn't over, but something had changed forever. Their fear was gone. They were no longer the ones waiting for mercy. They had become the ones who created their own.